Three, two, one. Welcome back. I've got a fantastic interview for you today. Someone that you have heard Julie and I speak about on the podcast before, Rob Johnson. And the reason I loved being Rob's coach is because there was never a coaching call where he didn't have some ridiculously amazing story to tell about some international head of state, some celebrity buying some amazing house, and how he was, on their yacht looking at real estate and all these crazy things. So Rob is the very definition, not just of a luxury agent, but of an ultra luxury agent. And so Rob Johnson, without any further delay, and by the way, Rob sells in Greenwich, Connecticut. So Rob, if you don't mind, and you decide whether or not you want to give out your contact information, obviously, but let them know a little bit about yourself and your market and all that good stuff so they can become more familiar with you.
Well, thank you as usual. It's been a while, Tim, but it's great to see you. I know we caught up for a few minutes. Your hyperbole is always very much appreciated, and thank you. I think we can take heads of state off the list, but I wouldn't have any problem trying. So yeah, I work in my primary market's Greenwich, Connecticut. I do the odd thing just outside, and the neighboring towns, but really 95% of my business is in Greenwich. So it's a town of 70,000 people in Connecticut. It's pretty international. My average deal is 4, but it goes up to 50.
Right.
So it's a pretty broad range of pricing, but obviously dips into that luxury and sort of ultra luxury range as well.
So on this podcast, here's what we're going to be doing. I wrote a whole bunch of questions down with Rob, but I'll do my best to get to maybe 3 or 4 of them because we are definitely going to get sidetracked with some funny stories. But Rob, I do want to talk about lead generation. I want to talk first of all about you didn't grow up in Greenwich, right?
Mm-hmm.
You moved to that market. You didn't come from a real estate background. You were on Wall Street. So give them a little bit of background, because really what I'm trying to emphasize is the fact that no matter where you are in the United States, even in an incredibly exclusive enclave like Greenwich, Connecticut, you can still become, as successful as you are. #1 agent in your brokerage in Greenwich.
Well, I think it's important to remember, if people have the trepidation of starting out, that everyone's been there. It's usually, especially in suburban markets, I guess it might be slightly different in markets like LA and New York, but it's very, very often a second career for a lot of people. So I'm not unusual in that regard. My market's reasonably international, so the fact that I'm a Brit, despite being here for 20 years, wasn't really a barrier to entry. I think my background was helpful, coming from from a finance side in my first career. So I think it depends on the market that you're in and what you've done before, but it's a career that by definition you can come from many different careers, places, and backgrounds.
Well, what I'm really trying to emphasize is the fact that you didn't grow up in Greenwich. I think your wife did, didn't she?
Yeah, my wife did. We met in we were both working out in Hong Kong in the 90s, and I couldn't put Greenwich on a map back then. Could have been anywhere, but that's how I ended up here.
Okay, and so you moved there, and when you first were in real estate, you were doing, you weren't selling real estate, you were doing remodels, you were doing things like that. I mean,
I left. I partnered up with guys who built a house for me a long time ago, who do an amazing job, and I basically, I didn't have a set path to build a transactional real estate career. It was more, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to learn something different, and that learning was more involved around building and spec houses. What we found was pretty quickly is that we didn't think the guys we were paying to sell our product were knocking the ball out the park. So we thought partly we represent ourselves. We knew the houses better, and we'd save a bit of money. So I kind of came into it by it was more by luck than good judgment. Around the same time, our market got pretty soft, and I decided that it was becoming a little scary for me to use more capital. So I used the transactional the brokerage side to increase my revenue on a risk-free basis rather than carry on committing capital to projects that was at risk. So but as soon as I started doing that, I loved it, and that side of the business grew pretty quickly, and I stuck with it, and I haven't done any investment stuff for quite a while.
I remember when we first started talking, you were driving a pickup truck.
Yeah.
And we spent a lot of time talking about what your next vehicle should be. And I believe after a good many phone calls, we moved you towards a Range Rover, which seemed to be appropriate.
Yeah, I went through a few of those, and actually, we've got a lot to catch up on cars, by the way. So the icing on I think the story that I remember telling you back then was I had a beautiful truck, loved it. This Ford F-150, a top of the range thing, and I picked up a $7 million buyer. This thing was spotless, and the guy comes. I picked him up from the station, and the guy turned to me and said, "What the fuck is that?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" I said, "This is my car." Because you're taking me to see $7 million houses in a truck, and I'm like, "Wow, that was kind of like an eye opener for me." And I remember telling you the story, and you're like, "Yeah, no shit." The guy doesn't want to be turned around, and I was initially kind of offended that he was so insulted by my mode of transportation, and the fact that I picked him up in a new car was good enough. Apparently not. So that was a steep learning curve, and the coaching call that you and I had after that was, yeah, no shit, you've got to get yourself a Range Rover. So I did what you told me to do, and that worked out fine. But actually, in COVID, I ended up buying. And I just sold it because I wasn't using it as much. But I ended up buying a Sprinter van that had been gutted and sort of tricked out into a mobile office. But that worked great for a while as well for kids tailgating and sports, but also taking clients around with a driver, or making that available to clients for their use if they wanted to do a golf trip or go into the city or do that type of thing. But anyway, yeah, I remember the truck. My daughter, actually, I think I told you, my daughter, who was probably like 8 or 9 at the time, when I sold it, she burst into tears. And I think when she makes her first check, I think the first thing she's going to buy is a pickup truck.
So when you were telling me we had to catch up on cars, I was not expecting you to tell me about a Sprinter van. I thought for sure you were going to tell me that you finally bought the Aston Martin that you wanted or something like that. Never has.
No, I had a really good friend that did. He said I bought my he called me because he knew my favorite car was an Aston Martin, and he said, "Hey, I just bought your favorite car." I'm like, "Great, congratulations." They said, "Now you have to buy one too," and I'm saying, "There's no way I'm buying a car like that. If I'm seen driving around my town in a car like that, it's not LA or Vegas. I would lose more business than I would even
let's
know."
talk about that. That's actually a really interesting point, because I want to go 1/2 step back too.
Mm-hmm.
As I'm standing here wearing a t-shirt, you look like a proper gentry English gentleman, in
the library.
In the library, right?
Yep.
But you also, at the time when you upgraded to the Rover, you also upgraded your clothing. You started thinking about more. I remember some calls we had where you said, well, let's lean into the whole British thing, because that's going to be a great way for people to remember you. We're going to just really, lean into the whole branding aspect of you being a proper British gentleman. And that really did work out, because it was a great differentiator. And to your credit, and this is, again, we talk about this in the podcast, you were able to break through in a market where there was the very definition of blue blood agents that have been there since the dawn of time. You had to compete against really, really wonderful, very skilled, very, very, they had the best social connections you could possibly have. And you were still able to start dominating that market. And so how much, in retrospect, how much of that did have to do with the fact that you are being conscious of what, essentially how you had to present yourself? I know it sounds like a basic, silly question, but I think it's really.
No, I think it's important. I mean, I didn't really change the way I dress so much. I've always kind of liked nice clothes. I don't go crazy, and for anyone that's listening, Tim would always tease me about being cheap, by the way. So it's like you got to spend, you got to do this.
You remember when you finally bought a really nice watch? How proud of yourself you were.
Well, my wife bought me this watch for my it was for our anniversary, so I guess I bought it, but she gave it to me. But
That's right. That's how you
the
rationalize. Well, but Rob, why is it that this is a really interesting point because I was interviewing Valerie Fitzgerald. This was during COVID, and she used to drive a Bentley every day, and she got rid of her Bentley and got a or Prius, wherever the heck they are,
yeah.
during COVID and whatnot. And she was obviously trying to adapt to what the market was expecting in a market like that. No, was it no, it was the housing crash, actually. It wasn't even COVID.
Mhm.
So what you said driving an Aston Martin in Greenwich, Connecticut, one of the highest income per capita of any place on planet Earth. Why would driving a nice car be off-putting to potential clients?
I mean, not to everyone, but I think the Northeast is a pretty conservative market in when it comes to things like outward displays of wealth. You have to be a little careful with that. I mean, obviously everyone's different on what they like and what they want to spend their money on, but if you have someone that's working for you that is trying to make themselves out to be, it can come across as fake and flashy and without any depth, um, and everything associated with that. It's kind of difficult to describe, but there's a core sort of value system in the Northeast, which is a little bit different from out west or Texas or Vegas, where that type of um, that type of sort of display of what you drive and image is perceived very differently. So, do I like cars? Yes. Do I spend a fortune on them? No. I just don't think it's just not really appropriate. I'd rather have a nice car and just leave it at that and let my job do the talking a little bit more. You obviously don't want to show up in a um, in a in a dumpy car that with full of McDonald's wrappers in the back, and there's a balance. But I think being too showy is I think a mistake.
Well, so again, this seems like a rudimentary conversation, but the reality of it is this is relevant to anyone who's thinking about getting the upper end because they really have to become like what their ideal clients, they have to know where they travel. They have to know what kinds of brands they like. They have to dress like them. They have to actually change their behavior so that the people who they're trying to attract to do business with them are going to want to do business with them.
Yeah,
People
I think there's a big difference with showing what you can do in very um, statistical terms and and displaying your knowledge, and then it crosses a line between competing with them to be the same as them. You're not trying to do that. I don't think. Like, yeah, I think that shows that you're kind of a tryhard and a bit of an arrivist. I don't think people want you to understand what their needs and desires and likes are. It doesn't mean you have to be the same as them. And I think also, everyone's different. So there's an element in our market that is newer money. There's an element that's international, and there's an element that's old school, family waspy type stuff. So those groups, they live and spend money very, very differently. So I think having a radar to who you're dealing with is, but that's kind of back to your point, is very important. Knowing what their lifestyle is like and what they're trying to achieve is great. It doesn't mean you have to replicate that.
That's a very good point, especially considering in the Northeast that there are definitely very well. I remember you headed me off the heads of state thing, but you did do business with one of a family member of former president. The last name starts with a B.
Mm, I can.
Do I have to quiz you?
No, I don't think that's. Yeah, let's.
We'll move past that. We don't want to
Yeah,
talk
well,
about
yeah,
client names.
we'll
Yeah.
move past that.
Well, so again, know your market, listeners. That's really what we're trying to impress upon
Yeah,
you.
I think just having a radar to it. You're not competing with your clients socially. You're serving them, and
Yeah.
and the thing that impressed me at the beginning that I read was it was a level of service that if you can give the level of service to that type of client base that they're used to in other areas of their life, then that's way more important than what car you drive.
You just said something. I'm sorry for interrupting you, but you just said something that's really, really freaking important. That's what I was trying to say earlier. You said it better than I did. No surprise. You said basically be conscious of the fact that the folks that you're doing business with in the ultra high net worth category, they are used to and expect a certain level of service. And if you don't know what that certain level of service is, if you don't know, essentially, if you haven't experienced that, you're going to be misaligned with the expectations of that prospective client. And there is a huge difference between, and it is, Rob, this is really a good place for us to pivot. And I didn't want to cut you off at a story, but
No,
I
that's
mean,
fine.
well, it's because I remember, like every single high-end agent, luxury agent we've ever coached, they are very reluctant to overly delegate. They don't want to basically ever take themselves out of the front lines dealing directly with those ultra high-end clients, because the ultra high-end clients will fire them if they do.
Well, it's
And
very difficult. That's the problem with one of the problems with the upper end. It's like, how do you scale your business? And it's you and I'll take full responsibility. I'm not very good at delegating either. So I'll put that out there, and I've got better at it over time. But on the upper end, especially the suburban markets, because I know teams are an important part of the landscape in the metro areas, but they're really not in the more suburban areas. So you're left with how do you leverage a personal brand that you've built without overly delegating. So that's the kind of key. I never felt attracted to running a team. That was partly because I don't think it works very well in the high end, because I think a high touch point between when a client chooses you, they're choosing you, so it's difficult to delegate anyway. But I think you change your role as a team leader then as someone who is more of a people manager of your team, and all the things that go along with that, like all the logistics and why didn't you refer me that guy? Why did that go to this girl? That, all that stuff. I personally, I'd rather stick needles in my eye than have those conversations on a daily basis. I'd rather deal with clients, and I find it more interesting and more rewarding. And they expect that too. So I've kind of stuck along those lines. But the good thing about the industry is there isn't a right or wrong way to do it. I think you can tailor it towards what you're good at, basically, even in the high end. But the high end gets tricky because the risk of delegating someone is they might be happy with that transaction, but you're not going to be front of mind when their managing director or their cousin or whatever moves to town. That relationship, if your colleague has done a good job, they'll be calling that colleague, and you'll have lost that point of contact. So it's kind of a balancing act.
so give us you have, you sold a house for $50 million, a little bit of time ago.
Mm-hmm.
You were on the buyer side of that transaction, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So that was, at the time, I think it was the highest residential transaction in America, and maybe still one of the top 5 highest. Is that true? Is that correct?
No, well, in town there was at the time there was probably one. There was a piece of land that had sold more in Greenwich, but and subsequently there are a couple of houses that have sold for that too. So it was historically up there for Greenwich, but there's plenty of examples in lots of different markets higher than that. I mean, Palm Beach, that seems to be like a daily occurrence with a couple of the key agents down there. Obviously, Manhattan, LA, it's got some, they've got some numbers in the hundreds on some of their properties. So yeah, locally, it was a high number, but and those are always fun. It gives you the ability to get your name out there again and be that person that is involved with that transaction. It's always good for branding. And it's a great commission check, but it's very difficult to rely on whatever the upper end of whatever the agent's market is, whether that's 1 million or 50 million. It's difficult to get continuity of income if you solely rely on that. So you have to kind of balance it out. I mean, I've had it before where, you know, friends or past clients have said, oh, you probably don't want this piece of business because, you know, you only do like really high end stuff. And like, well, if you think that, then I'm doing a bad job of communicating it. My range has been 900 grand to 50 million. You see the sexiest stuff on Instagram and those types of posts, but my average is about 4 million. So, you know, to navigate the peaks and troughs of commission, you need to be active in multiple price points, I think, depending on how big your market is.
So this is an interesting question. We're going to get to the lead generation. I know everyone always wants to know about lead generation, but what's the difference between working with someone in a $4 million price point than, say, for example, a 20, 30 or $50 million price point? Are there any real fundamental differences in the actual customer?
Yeah. Well, I would say not. I mean, it's the same variation of personality types in all these, in every deal, but whether it's the high end or the middle or lower. But I would say the biggest difference, and this inflection point will change from market to market, but for us, above for this market right now, above about 8 to 10 million, it starts getting into that discretionary purchase range. So at 15, it definitely is. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're, you know, everyone has a different definition of what the bare bones requirement is for them to live in a house. So, but above 12 to 15, you start getting into situations where I've already got that basic level of house covered in other areas, normally maybe 3 to 4 different markets. I have $15 million to spend on my next house, which is more a desire than a need. And those buyers become, even a billionaire will tell you over a drink, I don't need a $20 million house. I want a $20 million house if the right thing comes along. And if the right thing comes along, I'll be very elastic and I'll pay 30. But so that's the main difference wherever, and it's slightly different for each consumer, but knowing that those purchases become very discretionary, and those clients can make it very easy, or they can look for 5 years. I showed a property, high 20s this week. It's a listing that I've had for a while. And a buyer showed up. I've seen that buyer and agent out with those people on and off for 4 years. They probably will buy something in our market, but people's motivation at that price point changes dramatically, and it becomes a lot more discretionary. That's the biggest difference.
I understand. That makes perfect sense. So when you and I first started talking, you were dealing with a market that was very, very much a buyer's market. And I remember a coaching call you and I had, which was very fascinating, because you were explaining, you were talking about these, you've always been a strong listing agent, and you were talking about the different losses that these sellers were taking on their homes. And, you know, bought it for 10, selling it for 6, big losses. And I was trying to get a thorough, because usually that's going to be a deal breaker. Most people aren't just going to be able to afford to do that. But your sellers at that point in the market had a sort of factored in the fact that they were going to lose money on the house. And that was okay, because they wanted to live in Greenwich. They wanted the schools, they wanted the lifestyles. And for a while in Greenwich, it was almost like, and I don't want to speak for you, but I'm just remembering and recalling, for a while in Greenwich, it was almost like buying an expensive house. The expectation was it was going to depreciate just like buying a car. Am I overstating it? And then in that time frame, the market's changed back to what it is today. So if you can kind of take us through like 10 years of market gyrations, because again, this is very fascinating.
Yeah, so our previous high watermark was probably around 2006-07. Financial crisis of 08 slowed things down like it did for everyone. We're not the most correlated market to Wall Street, but we're pretty heavily correlated. You know, we're close proximity to New York, so it's there in the background for a reasonable amount of people that live in the town. It sort of was a sideways market for a little bit. By 10 and 11, there were a couple of recovery transactions, but it wasn't consistent. And then it just was it varied significantly depending on which part of the town that we're in. I think the weakest part of the town over that 2006 to 2019 period, probably before COVID, the least attractive part of town was probably still at a 40% discount to 2006-7, running into COVID starting. The more family neighborhoods and with a larger buyer base, we're probably off maybe 10 to 20. So that was kind of a big difference. COVID changed things for a lot of reasons. We don't need to go through that. Everyone knows that story. 20 and 21 were sort of COVID related. 22, 23 were more redefined by people's taste changing. So I think what has been very helpful to our market as well, I think social issue. New York's our biggest driver market. So if our market's soft, that means less people are moving from New York. Really, that's basically it. It can be impacted by different things, but if our core market isn't coming, then we're gonna go lower, and that's what was happening. People were staying in cities longer, not just Manhattan, but they were staying in LA and San Fran and these metro areas. COVID reversed that, but what also happened simultaneously, by the time we got into the last couple of years, I think a lot of the the desire to live in urban areas had diminished. Work flexibility obviously helped, but some of the social issues started kicking in with people from Manhattan, where it's like, hey, I'm going out my apartment on the Upper West Side, and I'm getting panhandled at 8 in the morning with my 2 toddlers. I'm done. So I found out over time you can abuse the residents of your market on taxation, and they'll stay. If you start introducing tricky social conditions, people move very quickly. And I've seen in the same period of time, I've seen an increased amount of people moving from California, even though we're one of the smaller beneficiaries nationally. But it used to be not very common, and that ticked up a little bit. We wouldn't see many LA people. We had a few of those. San Fran was more finance based, so people were moving companies from California to New York, or to Connecticut, and moving their businesses. Obviously, places like Texas and Arizona saw that impact a lot more substantially than we did. But it was even noticeable for us. And then in the last year or two, we had such a large amount of people for a medium-sized market that moved here. I found that a lot of people now have been out here. They've never been out here before, but they had 3, 4, 5 friends move out, and they've come out at the weekends. They've heard good things. So now we've got like a second generation of friends following friends. So that's kind of like a brief summary of our market, and it's for 2 different reasons between COVID and then the last stuff I was talking about. Our market has been very imbalanced for the last 4 years, with many more buyers than sellers. The sharp raise in interest rates exacerbated that, where people that want to move in our town have felt trapped with those interest rates, which I'm sure you've talked about a lot with other people on other calls. That's settled down a little bit, but that was definitely squeezing our market. But I'm sure Greenwich was similar to other affluent towns, where there was an acceptance that our real estate was weak before COVID, but those sellers might not have had they knew where the liquidity was. Say, to use your example, if they bought their house at 10 and they knew the liquidity was at 6 in one of the weaker parts of town, they'd be like, great, I don't need or want that liquidity, so I'll be a medium-term landlord. So we had a large amount of rental inventory that was really unmotivated sellers, not professional landlords. As soon as that good market came along over those first 2 years, those guys were like, great, I don't have to be a landlord anymore. And they fueled a significant deal volume for a while that met that demand. But then as rates hiked and those natural sellers sort of washed through, our market got even more squeezed, and prices carried on going up. It feels like we're at the end of that now, but it's difficult to say that we've weakened yet, because we're coming off the middle of summer and into an election year. So it's a little bit difficult to kind of call what we're doing now, but it feels like it's getting a little bit more settled.
You said something there that I think will be interesting to a lot of listeners, is you said that interest rates had an adverse effect. So what percent of the transactions that you do are all cash versus people getting loans?
Well, there's two parts of that. One is it depends on the price point. And two, it depends on what the buyer thinks he can get away with. So 30-day mortgage contingencies were very common up to 2019. Since then, it's become not a prerequisite, but if you want to buy a house that's come on the market quickly, you never want to persuade. I always say I'm never going to persuade you to do something that's not in your comfort zone. But until you're comfortable pulling this mortgage contingency, if it's something that's been on for a week and it's best and final on Sunday, if you put one in, you're just not going to buy the house. So we've got people pulling building inspections. They're not going to take your mortgage contingency. So, everyone's different. You miss a few houses and then they get comfortable with that. But I think it's important for agents not to ever, whether it's a financing contingency or anything else, I think you're not going to get thanked in the long run for persuading someone to do something that's not in their comfort zone. So, and then the price point, for me, it feels, and again, everyone's different, but it feels like above up to about 3 million mortgages tend to be more of a necessity. Above that, it sort of tapers off. It's impossible to have hard numbers on this, but it becomes, the financing component above 4 becomes more flexible and more discretionary. The buyer has more options. They could do portfolio loans. They could do this. They could do that. So it becomes the inflection point for that type of business has tended to be about 3.5 million, where people have more flexibility on it. Below that, people are are going on their pre-qualification and knowing that to actually be able to buy a house, they have to pull it, but they'd really rather have it in there if they had the choice.
What surprises a lot of folks, it surprises me, frankly, is when you look at the ultra high end and of any kind of consumer product, really the expensive products, mostly yachts, planes, boats, really expensive cars, a great deal of the business is financed, like 90% of it's financed.
And I think what's interesting on the really high end is that it runs a really broad range on how people buy houses. And I think the biggest contributing factor to their take on it is how they grew up, I've found. So I think I've had certain clients that if they bought an expensive house, they would put debt, not just on their house, but they would put debt on anything that they owned if they could, because they have a strong belief in themselves that they can outperform a market and they can do more with their debt than they can do with their cash. The opposite of that tend to be the people that are very adverse to debt and will not have any debt. They tend to be more self-made people that grew up without money and have been independently successful, that debt is anathema to them. So I think it's debt on the high end I found is a very personal thing. I think it's actually been one of the most interesting parts of the job, is to see how wealthy people approach that topic.
It is interesting. I find it interesting too, because really that if you look at strictly from an analytical perspective, if you think you can get 10% return on your investment, but you can borrow money at 5%, well, obviously you have 5% you could be making if you put that same money in the markets. But again, I know from having coached some of the, I've had some personal clients that were very, very high end, salespeople of things other than real estate.
Yeah.
And yeah, 90% finance. And these are people, I had one client that was selling yachts, and his average yacht price, it was about the same as your real estate price, around 3.5, 4 million. And he said, nobody pays cash. And maybe they're getting portfolio loans or things of that nature, but it's interesting to know. And again, listeners, we're just trying to educate you and maybe push past some of the myths that you might believe about working in the ultra high end. So
yeah, no one everyone, it doesn't matter whether it's debt or any other topic, most people in their mind have squared away the fact that they're a very reasonable person and that they're completely normal and average, right? So bearing that in mind, when you have a conversation about anything, including debt, I've just had really interesting conversations about, and because it tells you a lot about people where they are on that particular issue, on how they deal with a lot of things financially in their lives. And surprised I was surprised on the broad range of takes that people of similar financial backgrounds have on it. And I think my conclusion, as I said, my conclusion seems to be that the most powerful influence on that is how that person grew up.
I
But
totally, it
it
makes
could be
sense.
many other things. But that's been common.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense. It basically it depended on if you grew up as a poor kid who made it, you're probably very risk averse once you have it because you don't want to lose it. Whereas if you had the exact opposite where you grew up with money and the expectation was you are always going to have it, you probably were a little bit more
Yeah, there's
risky.
exceptions because that self-made guy is self-made people are by definition more resilient than people who inherited wealth in as well. So that the self-made person can also feel that very strongly that they can outperform bigger factors in a market too. So it's not it's it doesn't 100% correlate, but it's it's interesting hearing people's takes on it.
So buying real estate in the ultra high end is how frequently do people even factor in the investment potential of it, or are they just looking for a really nice lifestyle?
The latter.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
I think most people will they want to be they want to make smart decisions, but they also want what they want, and they realize that if you had a heart to heart with them, they're like, do I need it? Do I need a 10, 20,000 square foot house on the water? No. Do I want it? Yes. How can I be smart about it?
Yeah, mitigate as
Um,
many risks as they can, but at the end of the day, it's a personal purchase.
yeah,
That's
making non-financial, making part of real estate and not, I mean, it's such an emotional asset anyway that it's people, for better or worse, this can make things very difficult too, but there's strong emotions and subjectivity in real estate that you have to understand. Going back to knowing your client, you have to understand what they're trying to get out of it, and what they're willing to um, what they're how they're approaching real estate varies as well, like the approach to debt, and knowing what someone's trying to get out of that transaction is important, and knowing also that you're not going to be told the truth either.
okay. So you said two important things there, two interesting things. Knowing what they want out of the transaction. How do you self-discover that? Because I'm sure you're not sitting them down and like hardcore pre-qualifying them. And number two, the telling the truth part. What do you mean by those two statements?
Um, well, you mean so? The most common question that I get is like, okay, I'm going to buy this for 10 million. What is this in a weak market? What was this in 2018? What's my out? They're just trying to get comfortable with the downside of deals. I think I don't think the thought process of being, and I don't think this is unique to our market. I don't think a lot of people don't see it as they're not looking for a return, because they've seen, even though we're not in a weak market now, they've lived through, guys of our age have lived through enough, and have a memory of what real estate can do to you in good and bad markets. And I think they're just looking for some clarity on what the downside is, because they have a pain threshold on the downside. They may not admit it, but they're thinking it through when they buy.
Yep. Yep. That makes total sense. So let's move and talk about lead generation.
Mhm.
So I remember you were one of the coaching clients. I've had many that said this, that said, no matter what, you will never actually be a true proactive lead generator. But you actually were, because you did it in different ways, meaning that you're not, I mean, in Greenwich, it wasn't you weren't going to go after expired listings, for example, right? Overtly. And yet you were able to build a great brand for yourself in Greenwich, Connecticut, without spending a bunch of money trying to let people know that Rob Johnson is number one and all this Mickey Mouse. You basically let your actions do your branding for you, but how did you get those relationships initially? Because you did do a lot of very direct, focused, concentrated efforts towards, socially connecting. Can you tell the listeners, like, if you only could choose, Rob, three things to do for lead generation, what would they be? Only three.
Well, I think it was from your original coaching stuff from years ago that the idea of spokes um, in the wheel, that kind of resonated with me at the time. It's like it's just, it's just spreading your risk, and just not relying on one spoke in your with where you get leads from, and that was important. So it's like, okay, so I think everyone needs to go through, what they can, which parts of their life are going to help them at that particular time. So for me, it was, my, everyone starts out with friends, to a certain degree. But then once you start thinking about it, it's like, okay, who do I know that is, that we might have a mutually beneficial relationship with, an attorney or a wealth advisor, or I know one of your, I think it's Ben in LA, right? He did a lot of work with managers. So it depends on where you live. Like I don't really have that type of, we don't really have that in our market. It's not like a celeb market as much, even though there's well-known people. They don't really, not many agents get business through that area, which is probably a big part of the LA market.
Let's pause there so we can explain, because so basically, listeners, what he's saying is, if you're in LA, it's very normal for, it doesn't even have to be a celebrity. There's wealth managers or business managers, is what they call themselves, for people that are doctors. They usually specialize in different industries or specialize in entertainers or whatever. Like, Ben was working with a business manager that only worked with, I'm trying to remember, he was very specific. He'd only work with actors. He wouldn't work with musicians, that type of thing. And then you'd have, just to layer the complexity, those business managers, generally speaking, were the ones that were making a lot of the decisions on behalf of the client about who they were going to work with as far as the real estate agent. So if you're in a market like that, you better be networking with the business managers. Then on top of that, there's the agents. Now, the talent agents, you hardly ever get business from them. You're always going to get it from the business managers. A little bit of that bleeds through to New York. But when you go to these other major markets, even around the world, you don't see that whole business manager relationship. And that business manager relationship actually expands. We know, I have coaching clients actually, and who have chiefs of staff. Basically, they have somebody that runs their entire personal life. Will run all of their, basically be a property manager for them, manage the travel agents, do all this thing. So you've got to understand the complexity of working with the ultra high end, and you have to know which people you can network with, because if you're going to beat your head against the wall trying to get business out of a talent agent and you don't ever get any leads from it, it's because you're going down the wrong road. The business manager, on the other hand, manages their money.
Yeah, and so I mean, I did a deal recently with I love this couple, and he's a well-known entertainer, and their business manager. That was the last time I interacted with a business manager. Those guys came in right at the end of the deal. I've been working with them for 2 years already before I even had any email conversation with the business manager. The guys just stepped in at the end, but so it's not very common that happens. I think for me it was more. It was a social circle, and initially reaching out to some of those other professionals in this area, and then working, because of the nature of where the agents are in the company that I work for, that was key too. So I enjoyed work. So I started work for Halstead, which merged into Brown Harris Stevens, which is a 150-year-old brand in Manhattan. It's a high-end sort of townhouse, good market share, great lineage company. Most of the agents are Manhattan. They're sort of Manhattan, Hamptons, and they're in Miami and Palm Beach too. So it's kind of like that East Coast wealth strip. So out of 2,500 agents in our company, there's the majority are in Manhattan or the Hamptons. So making the effort to go in there and meet those individual agents and individual office managers, so that I could be the face put a face to a name of someone that is one of their clients is moving out to, in their mind, the sticks. I mean, like some of those agents in New York, everyone's very centric on their own market. New Yorkers are incredibly Manhattan centric, and most New York agents that I meet could have a great time with them, and they're lovely people and they're really good at their job. They couldn't give two shits about what happens in Greenwich, or a lot of times they've never even been here, even though it's 30 miles away. But so they don't really have any. The only thing that they have to go to is either to their managers, like, hey, we've got an office in Greenwich, right? Or so knowing who controls that referral network doesn't mean that I'm going to get all the business, but at least making yourself at least known and credible on an internal basis, depending on what your company structure is and where your leads are coming on. That was great for me. But a lot of my referral agents in the city are there. It's one-offs. Like, it's not like agents are very bad at referring in general nationwide. They're very bad at referring their own clients out to different markets and most of the time it's not their fault. Their clients don't have the relationship that they would call their local agent to ask for their advice on a different market or country. So you have to be so it's a much lower conversion rate than I thought it was initially, but that approach has still helped me to some extent. But most of the referrals that I get will be it'll be one-off past clients from those Manhattan agents, rather than a constant stream of people that continually send me business.
So what you did, and I remember, is you went directly to the people that ran the reload department inside your brokerage, and it wasn't a very big one, but this was maybe the previous brokerage. And then the other thing you did is you started basically haunting. You figured out who the top agents were in Manhattan that probably were the most likely referral sources for you, and you started, romancing them a little bit, and those have worked out to be great long-term relationships and friendships for you.
Yeah, there's one lady, Louise, who I think you've done a podcast with, right?
Yeah.
Louise Phillips. Yeah, I mean, love Louise, and I've managed to send her a couple of things back, and we have a more reciprocal relationship in that way. But normally it's not like that. It's actually, and this isn't a knock on anyone, but it's truly difficult to find a mutually beneficial referral relationship. There's always one underdog on that side. It's very, and if you can find a person for agents out there, if you can find someone in a different market that you can actually cross refer to on a reasonably regular basis, you're really lucky, and you should value each other tremendously. I actually had one. It makes me sad to tell the story, but one of the first ladies that, after I got licensed, one of the first ladies to call me up was a lady in the next door town to us who knew we had my brother and sister-in-law were clients of hers, and she called me up out of the blue. I didn't know her. She said, any relative of those guys is going to be someone that I'm going to help. Let me help you. I'll send you. I always have some crossover with Greenwich, and I don't want to go there anymore. It takes me too long. I'll send you my Greenwich business. There were lots of Greenwich people that suddenly find that they want to move to Darien too. So I could send her stuff back, but that was unfortunately she passed away about a year or two ago. But I love that lady, even outside of real estate. She was an amazing lady, and that was only the really truly active reciprocal relationship that I've been able to build. Just because there's a natural imbalance there that's very difficult to find that sort of thing. So if you can find one of those guys out there, really value it, because it can be great for both of you, and it's hard to find.
So you did other things. So we branched off of obviously, working referrals amongst other agents inside your brokerage. And then you started actually participating more in, I remember you joined a cigar thing. You had a shotgun shooting thing and all these other types of, sort of.
Yeah, stuff I like doing anyway. I think if you find stuff that you actually, I had to knock the cigars on the head a little bit. It was getting a little bit too much. But yeah, I met some, I've got some really good friends that came out of the cigar shop down in Greenwich. The guy that owns it, and a whole bunch of his customers. We became friends, and it was just fun. But yeah, it was actually helpful with business too. Shooting I've done since I was a kid, so that's easy. Golf I love, so that's easy. I think if you find something same as a career with a part. If you can combine something that you're genuinely interested in, it's a win-win.
You being you around other people that have a shared interest, it's naturally going to create long-term friendships. That's
Yeah,
the
and that's great. You know, having just working on those this is a tough job, and you end up working 7 days a week and spending a lot of time doing it. One of the downside is it leaves very little time sometimes when you get busy for family and friends. So if you can kind of combine the two, it's not only helpful with business, but it's kind of a life coaching thing as well. It's like, you know what, it shows you that you need to invest in those relationships and keep them up to I think it's important for people's mental well-being to keep up those to work on those friendships, and if those can come with a business positive angle too, I think that's awesome.
Well, again, this goes back to if you're wanting to get into the ultra high end, you're not going to be able to go and just start spending a bunch of money on branding and marketing. You're going to have to basically have shared interests. You're going to want to, if you don't have those interests now, if you don't know about expensive shotguns from England, or if you don't know about different cigars, if all these other things, learn. Go to the bookstore if there's a bookstore in your town. Go online, learn about what the folks that you're trying to attract to you're interested in, and find some of those things that you're going to be interested in as well. It doesn't have to be, something that's going to require you to spend a lot of money. You could just do
No,
pet charities. You can get involved in the community. There's so many different things. And if you have kids are actually one of the greatest, social connectors, ever, especially for in the high end. Let's talk a little bit about that.
yeah, I mean, I've got two kids in college now, and one left at one's a senior at high school. Um, that's always a great place to network with people, and helping other people's kids is unbelievably powerful as well. So if you take the time, this doesn't need to be in a cheesy, self-serving way, but if you're putting yourself out there, helping someone, whether it's your kid's friend, or it's a volunteer work with a local charity, if you're doing something that is not self-serving, it can have a positive impact too. People notice it, and they respect it. And I think going into some things without any expectation of a business upside can sometimes give you some very nice surprises, and it can make you feel great while you're doing it too. It's not. I don't think everything has to be a calculated Machiavellian pursuit, and nor does it, like to your point, nor does it have to cost you a fortune. You're already committing time to something. You don't get involved in stuff that's costing you thousands of dollars if it's not something that you don't already do, or you're not really that into, just because you think it might lead to one deal with one guy. I mean, you've got to kind of temper. I think there has to be a level of authenticity to it, which is real.
Right. And it's, there's all kinds of statistics that prove this out. It's not just relevant to ultra high end by the way, guys, it's every market segment. It's like, I think it's after 5 years, the average agent gets something like 60 or 65% of all their business from centers of influence and past clients.
Yeah.
And how do you build it if you don't have one? Well, like worst case scenario, you just move to a new market. You don't know anybody. Do exactly what Rob and I were just talking about. Go and involve yourself doing things that you already like to do.
Yeah, it could be the gym, like just
Oh,
or Pilates or anything. Like it really doesn't matter. Like I think if you're the polar opposite of the cigar thing is you could join I mean I like I don't do enough of it, but I like road biking. I mean I didn't join a group, but if you anything like that is great. It just gives you an opportunity to meet people when they're outside of a professional realm, and um they just want to be with like-minded people.
that's the thing about what we're describing. And if, Julie and I just got back from Car Week in Monterey. I'm sure you know about that. And you could be out there standing in front of somebody's, $30 million Ferrari, or just talking to different people, looking at this, crazy work of art. And then you realize the guy you're talking to is the owner and he's a multi-billionaire. But just having this conversation, you never in a million years would have guessed that, because we were both, admiring some little piece of history and just some little nerdy fact about it. But that applies to anything. Gyms are really a killer way to make great contacts too,
Yeah,
because you got
these
endorsements.
they're all arenas where you, especially on the high end, people that people on the high end, they're very sensitive. They have a very good radar for people that are looking to use them.
Interlopers, basically.
Yeah. So if you meet someone, if you're meeting someone, whether it's a gym or a Monterey car show, like at a car show, a guy with $1 billion is way more interested that that person asking that you come up and ask him about his gasket flange valve or whatever the hell it is. Like he's into the fact that you are relating on that level, and his guard is down because most of the rest of his life people want something from him or her. And
Totally.
once you're, I think, not that I've ever been in that position, but if you are, you become very good. Your EQ becomes very good on sensing that. So it has to be, that's why I say it has to be um, authentic to make it fun for you, but it also makes you that authenticity comes out in and helps you build rapport and relationships with people in a different way that you might not otherwise meet. But it has to go back to like something that's a bit, something that's kind of at least an element of being genuine.
So how, when you have those social relationships, the relationships that start out, how do you go about bridging the gap to basically talking about real estate? How does that happen?
Um, well, if it's someone that's already in my market, there's a reasonable chance that they know what I do. Not always. So sometimes it's the path is paved, and for better or worse, most people like talking about real estate. That's the good news for everyone out there. To the point where, once you get busy, it's like being I describe it as being a highly unqualified doctor. My doctor friends, and I've got a good friend that's a surgeon. I ran into him yesterday. There isn't a Christmas party or anything or a golf tournament or whatever that guy goes to where someone's not hitting him up for, hey, what do you think of my knee here? Like, it's, and real estate's the same. Unfortunately, we didn't have to go to school for 10 years to do the job. We went to school for 8 weeks, and always say that the best thing about this job is that there's zero barriers to entry, and the worst thing about this job is that there's zero barriers to entry. So, but people like talking about their health to doctors, but they also like talking about real estate as well. So it's very easy to you don't even have to try.
But you and I worked on a long time ago some simple things to seed the conversations occasionally. Like, by the
Yeah,
way,
someone's the
go
house,
ahead.
the nearby house that if you know where they live, it's like, hey, did you see that house that sold on up the street from you? What do you think? Blah blah blah. It's very easy to segue into a real estate topic, and have people want to, lately it's been, I've had people that I haven't seen or spoken to for a while call me out of the blue and say, hey, what do you think about all these changes? What's that gonna do to your market? And people are genuinely interested in that stuff.
You're talking about the commission sharing lawsuit stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, answer the question. What effect is that having on the ultra high end?
Well, I mean, it's very new, but we've obviously known it's coming for a while. um, I think in the short term, it's not changed things at all. I think over the long term, I think it doesn't matter whether you're talking about stocks or bonds or real estate. I think these types of moves tend to have in the long term a commission compression element to them. Um, and it's interesting looking at how different countries transact real estate in broader terms. With thinking, Australia, which is a big auction place, or the UK, which doesn't really have buyer rep. But I think it's still very new, and it was convenient because I had my own house on for 6 weeks this summer and then took it off. But I'll use myself as an example and say to people that have on a couple of pictures recently, they're like, so is it zero now on the other side? And I said, well, the rules have changed less than most people think, is my first line. And they're, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, it was always negotiable, and it still is. And I would still recommend that to give yourself the broadest buyer pool possible, I would recommend that's the best way to proceed, which is exactly what I did when I was listing my house earlier on this summer. I said, but you have to, but I'm very clear as well, say, but it's completely up to you. You can do whatever you want. You can put 0 on there, you can put you can put 3% on there, 2.5%, whatever your market norms are, as long as you stress the point that it's not a set commission structure. I think there's still a very compelling reason to actually pay a buyer's agent. But and the bigger topic is, I think that the biggest I think the biggest problem with the truth here is that what most people don't realize is that I think the whole court case was a politically motivated suit to empty the NAR's coffers. But that's a whole other bag of that's a whole other conversation that the consumer doesn't really care about. But so I think I describe it as a market in transition at the moment, and so far not much has changed.
Yeah, that's what, sorry, that was banging on my end. Yeah, that is what we're experiencing too. Julie and I have been watching this like a hawk and doing podcasts on this. And really on all the major markets that we watch, but also you can read, I think Redfin came out with a report, buyer agent commissions aren't dropping. And we've had some coaching clients that on, upper end coaching clients they've actually been able to raise the buyer agent commission. And they're getting the deals done. So, who knows? And I agree with what you just said. And it's also important to understand that it's a guideline. It's an agreement between the plaintiff's attorneys and essentially the NAR and all the MLSs. It's not the law. The laws as pertain to your individual state and all these other things,
Yeah.
it's subject to interpretation. I think there's only one state, maybe two, that actually have specific laws in place, actual laws that make it so buyers have to sign exclusives and then obligate themselves to the commission. But for the most part, it's market forces at the end of the day. That's the thing that's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's funny people's reactions to it, because I wasn't scared about it. It's just one thing it's one of those things that's out of my control. And there's a means and a way to make, to still have a great business despite what rules are changed. And even if they change again, people will figure it out. There'll be a way to have a great career in real estate. I think there might be a positive part about clearing out the decks on some of the less active agents that use this as a reason to, it's like, what, I just don't want those conversations that are a little bit trickier for me. Wasn't doing much anyway. I'm just going to throw in the towel. I welcome that side of it too.
I mean, there's 1.5 million members of the National Association of Realtors. There's supposedly 2.5 million licensees in the United States, but just focusing on NAR, half of those agents don't do any transactions, like none. And
going back to what I was saying about most of the, it's been interesting because I got pulled into a bunch of Zoom calls about this, because going back to what I said about 2,500 agents in the city, in the Hamptons, those are two markets that don't have MLSs. So Connecticut has had an obligation for agents to have buyer reps for 20 years, which Manhattan, Rebney obviously was a powerful body in New York and did some of that work, but it wasn't an MLS, and the Hamptons isn't an MLS either. So I was on a lot of Zoom calls with this, where there's a lot of agents that were, they were like a deer in headlights on this issue. I'm like, guys, it's not a big deal. The only thing, I had an agent call me and said, listen, I'm just going to pack it in. She was young. She has a wealthy client base. I'm like, why? And she said, well, my clients they're not going to pay me 2.5%. And I said, well, they're not if you think that. I said, if you can't communicate the fact that you add value to something, then maybe you don't deserve 2.5%. Maybe you shouldn't be doing it. But I don't know your market, but there's knowledge, there's power in the knowledge that you have with buildings and co-ops and condos and townhouses and whatever else your market entails to justify a value. But if you can't properly describe your value, then yeah, you have a problem.
We're coming out with a designation around just like what you just said. It's called Ethical Real Estate Professional. And the gist of it is it's going to be a complete A to Z buyer system. It's very similar to our pre-listing pack for sellers, where
Hmm.
agents are going to be able to give this information to prospective buyers, which is going to explain, articulate the value on behalf of the buyer's agent to that buyer. And there's going to be lots of risk reversal guarantees in there, things that you were already doing in your business for the most part. But yes, I agree with what you're saying. And fundamentally, the changes in the industry are going to be good because it's going to force the buyer agent side of the business to become more formalized. And, frankly, it's going to become more like a listing side. So agents are going to have to become more skilled all the way across the board.
I really, I mean, as an aside, I'll just say this one thing, political comment. I think as a fake consumer protection idea, I think it does the reverse of that. And
100%.
I think, I'm lucky enough to work in an affluent market, but if I'm working in a much more modest market and buyers are choosing not to pay out of pocket, and if listings start to go 0%, how I think you'll have a disproportionate amount of lower income families wanting to buy houses that are foregoing paying out of pocket that they can't add to a mortgage, who will be with a listing agent that has no fiduciary duty to them, and that demographic is at risk of making very expensive mistakes with the biggest asset of their life. So I think it's a very ill thought out system of not being able to advertise commission. The lack of clarity on that, I think it's an anti-consumer protection thing. But guess what? This is the landscape that we've been handed, and let's work within it, within it the best we can.
We're in the first inning of a very, 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 very long game. That's really at the end of the day what
Yeah.
happens. You said not being political, but really this is politics. And depending on what happens with, the election and whatnot, that'll greatly determine what happens to the reinterpretations of that new guideline. That's for sure. So something else you also talked about is about branding. Now,
Mm-hmm.
the way that the industry interprets branding, and correct me if you don't, this is what it seems to me like. Branding has been sold as a way to try to shortcut the idea of building an actual reputation of having gotten results for customers in the marketplace. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of agents in the business basically are being beaten across, and this is only true because the market's been the way it is, but they've been beaten across the head with the idea that you have to work on your brand, have to do social media, have to do all this, have to. Versus the way you've done it, where you've actually built your brand, your reputation. So they're conflating the word branding with reputation. They're trying to fool the industry into thinking that you can buy a reputation, but you truly can't. Does that resonate with you?
Yes. I think the whole industry, along with other industries too, and as a society, I think we're being just be very, if someone is going to profit from enhancing your brand, just be cynical about that and question whether it's something that you really need, because there's a long list of people that are looking to sell you a website design or a Instagram follower number target, or it's just, you got to see through and that's their business. They're not helping you. That's their business. So I think seeing the wood for the trees on that is important, and feeling peer pressure to spend all that. I think being selective about what you spend money on on that basis is, you got to be smart about it. I think you need a certain amount, and it'll vary depending on what type of business you want to build. But I think you need to be readily visible online. I think you need to curate a little bit of content, but the value add disappears pretty quickly. And the more important stuff, like anything, it's like trying to lose weight or start working out. It takes a long time, and I think you made a great point. Is conflating reputation with brand is trickery, and the real value comes in action, not in an Instagram post.
Yep.
So the fact, if over time, if you build credibility with your fellow agents, that you're professional and ethical and a straight arrow. I think my working relationships with other agents are really important to me. If I ever thought that someone thought that I'd done something wrong, I would wake up at like 2 or 3 in the morning. I know other people that do this job that would sleep like a baby no matter how they behave, but I can't do that. So, but I think that having a consistent and long-term behavior is going to serve you well. The problem is, guess what? That takes a long time. So
it does take it does take a lot of time, but it's really there's no shortcuts to
It's
it.
the only way. No, it's the only way to do it. It's like, hey, I want to be ripped with, I want to be able to bench press 300 pounds, and like, you can't, you can't do that overnight.
No,
Well,
and
I could never do it. But you know what I mean.
it's funny. You when you're in your 20s, if you'd asked yourself the question, do I want to be rich or do I want to be famous? And then ask the same question of yourself when you're in your 30s, your 40s, and you just turned 50s. It's very fascinating. And I've been in this coaching and training space for so long. And I ask those when I'm talking to someone that, millennial, and they're really, really attracted. They're seduced by the whole idea of building their brand. They want to be real estate influencers. They just love that stuff. And they're not thinking through as to why they're finding it so attractive. It's because they really want to be famous. So there must be something physiological in all of us at certain
Yeah.
points in our lives where that, peacocking around and wanting to be perceived as being famous, it has to be something that's very innate in all of us. But as we
Yeah.
get older, we outgrow that. Not everyone, but most people
Uh,
do.
yeah, it tapers off for some people, not all, as we know. But I think, I mean, one definition of wealth to me would be to not have a phone.
Definitely.
So so everyone's different. But if I could say, hey, if I left this on my desk now and came back tomorrow morning, um, and I hadn't had a panic attack immediately 5 minutes later after leaving it here, that would be, I need it, I use it, but it's not a freedom thing, it's an anchor thing. And I think the older you get, you do what you have to do, but it's I think there's different definitions of freedom and wealth, and people, that changes with age.
So what are you working towards? You've got one kid in Harvard, one kid in Yale,
No,
another kid. I
no,
remember. I remember. Wait, but
no, I got
no?
no, I've got a son at Duke,
Ah,
and a daughter at
right.
Stanford.
Yeah. Oh, the son at Duke, lacrosse, right?
Yes, and
Yeah.
a daughter playing lacrosse at Stanford too, and they both love it. And I'm glad that they love it. It was a nice summer, and it was nice that they left and went back. So everyone's happy.
Well,
The
so where are you going with all of this in your career? Because you're at the point financially, and I won't get into any weeds, but you're at the point financially, you're at the point in other aspects of your life that you don't have to choose to have that phone, tied to your hip
No,
all the
I
time.
mean, if I'm going to do the job, I do it. I don't. I'm not saying I resent it, even though but I think I would say it was a definition of. I think it's a definition of wealth, being having a lot of time and not being tied to other people's time is a pretty good definition of wealth. But my goals are to carry on working. I genuinely enjoy what I do, and I'd like to think I'm at least competent. So the I think I don't have any set goals. I I fell into a trap a few years ago of thinking that the numbers mean everything, though, and I think this was a valuable lesson where I I had a really good year before COVID, and a lot of other agents hadn't. So I became like, I had the bragging rights to be like the top agent in the state, and then immediately that caused me a lot of stress. And I was like, oh, that means I've got to do it again, or otherwise I'm a failure. And working through that, I felt like, you know what, it's this is something that I'm doing to myself out of being competitive, and I felt, I think you've got to be a bit kinder to yourself than that, and I felt like if I'm slightly more selective, or I'm happy not, if it doesn't drive me crazy that one person is posting that at the end of next year and it would ruin my week, I've got over that. It doesn't mean that I can't be that guy, and I don't want to be that guy, but it doesn't ruin my day if I'm not. And one of and I think I was at a pitch this week, and they said, oh, we just had a lady that was before you that said that she was the number one person in town. What do you say to that? And I said, well, that's great for her. It's not necessarily great for you, but I'm happy that she's happy. I said I was in that spot, but what I found was, if an agent that you're dealing with is putting an incredible amount of pressure on them to be the number one spot, that's nothing about their customers. So I've tried to retrench it to be a more to say that I may or may not be number one, and that doesn't matter. What matters is how I serve you, the customer, and do you feel delegated? Do you feel looked after? Do you feel like I'm doing a good job? That is more important to me, and will by default keep me successful, because you're going back to the nuts and bolts there, where you're actually doing what people want you to do, rather than using other people to make an extra 100 grand.
The script with this, I remember, and by the way, I remember one of the goals that you did set for yourself when we first started talking is you did want to be the number one agent, and you did accomplish that goal within like 24 or 36 months. But the script for that, by the way, is when, you know, you're back in that listing presentation, this is for listeners, not for Rob, as you say, you know, Mr. Seller, I appreciate the fact that Sally's, you know, says she's the number one agent in the marketplace, but help me understand, how does that benefit you?
Right.
And you just reframe it like that, and they're not going to have an answer because it really doesn't. And then Rob would then spin into, because I know, you know, what he would say, he'd say, well, listen, here's the thing I've discovered having sold, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars, I'm sure you're well over $1 billion at this point, is that people choose me because of me. People choose me because they know when they're working with me, they're going to get me whenever they need me. I do
Yeah, and I've actually gone full circle, because when I started and you were helping me with those scripts, it's like, okay, you can't say that you have this $1 billion track record when you start, but what you can do is you can promise them a level of service that will knock their socks off. So
right.
you're really going back to that, and that's what I was doing at the beginning. I was competing with people that I was doing a fraction of what they did, but if, and again, this goes back to being authentic. If you're putting yourself on the line and saying, I'm going to go to I'm going to go the extra yard to make sure this house is sold, and you've got me. Like I'm your person. Other people, the person that's coming in that's selling 5 times more than you, can't hand on heart say that. They can talk about a track record, and you can, like, you, to your point, you can make the point to the person that you can't compete against them on numbers, but at the beginning, but you can compete on other stuff, and people will find that that is more meaningful than numbers, because as an industry, realtors have a terrible reputation of taking like one good month and saying they're top project. Like, they get a million of these postcards in the thing. I'm the top dog. Like, no one gives a shit. Like, are you good at your job? And are you going to be professional and do everything that you say? That's all I want. That's what people want. They don't care that you've represented whoever. Well, some people might, but it's like it's more. I found that you helped me get to that level, and that was awesome. It was a little bit different there when I got there than I thought it might be, and I think it's been more helpful and productive to kind of retrench. I don't want to be. I'm not semi-retired, and I'm not taking my foot off the gas, but I think I'm being more. This is
Strategic.
not. Yeah, it's more. It's a bit more strategic, and it's strategic for my clients, but it's also strategic for me.
So again, when you were starting out, and this is what you know, everyone, this is for everyone, is that when you're competing against a top agent and you don't have a sales track record, you explain to them, listen, here's the bottom line. I only take on 3 clients. That's it. Or 5 clients or 10 clients, whatever you can reasonably service. And, you know, and right now I've got 4 clients. I'm looking for 1 additional client. And I know for me to do a really great job of taking care of, you know, all your needs and finding the home. And if you're on the listing side, there's a long litany of things you're going to help them accomplish, that I really can't overtax myself. And I don't want to delegate you. I mean, do you want to be delegated? That's the problem with working with top producing agent, is from one day to the next, you don't know, with a team, you don't necessarily know who you're going to be working with. When you hire me, you get me.
Yeah,
When
and
you
it gets worse than that. It's like sometimes the delegation, it's not just being delegated, which in itself for some people is a problem. It's also it's that delegation beyond the initial feeling of rejection for the client. It also sucks because it's very difficult to get, you know, say if it's a junior member of your team that can't answer the question about the septic system or the history of the property, it adds insult to injury. So I that so I didn't really answer your question very well, but so I don't have any. I just want to keep providing a good level of service to people, and that in itself will be will retain a good business and be satisfying at the same time, if that makes sense.
It does completely, because you're being true to yourself. You know you're doing a great job helping people, and it turns out that that's actually how you build a really damn good brand, by doing what you say you're going to do at the highest levels. I mean, that's really, at the end of the
Yeah.
day, that's how you build any kind of business, not just real estate. So we've obviously gone way over time, so I love talking with you. We haven't gotten
It
any stories. Can I pull one story out of you?
to You have to have a filter, and you get a filter over time on who's real and who's not real. And the story that I would tell is that I've just dealt with a situation like this week, so it's a fresh wound, with a fantastic agent who doesn't normally traffic in that space. She normally does up to 5, 6, 7 million. Those buyers need a house. The $20 million buyer might just want to launder money and take it out of some spurious, like that doesn't happen in the normal price ranges. So even in this town, I dealt with a great agent that really struggled with that. And for better or worse, unfortunately, the more stuff you do in the higher end, it brings on those. There's an element with qualification that gets and legitimizing prospects that gets really tricky. I had a non-performing buyer at 28 million earlier on this year, which was a very long, drawn out process. It's quirky.
That's quirky. You can't say all that and say it's quirky. So what are the early warning signs that you're dealing with somebody nefarious?
They're just very cagey about personal details, which isn't necessarily a normal flag, a flag for everyone, but it can be. Providing slightly questionable forms of proof of funds, not having their true identity. I mean, I've got a question if I can't Google someone.
100%.
I mean, that's the first thing. But I also have a client that I've also had a couple of clients that have spent large amounts of money to make sure that they're not Googleable too. So it's not a rule, but it's a starting point. 90% of people, you can find out something about them online very, very quickly. So that's the first step. If it's after that, then it's some type of background, company website, um, uh, uh, proof of funds is good, but that doesn't always tell the story either, because it doesn't. As one client rightly pointed out, and he goes, "Great, I can see what his assets are. I don't see what his liabilities are."
Exactly.
So, and asking someone to provide something that is signed off on by a compliance department will probably cost you the showing.
Yep. And well, you can also socially connect people too. Like you can check them out socially if you find out what circles they're running. If somebody just shows up out of the blue, as you do have people happen that show up out of your,
Yeah.
Europe or wherever, they just say, I'm flying in, I want to look at, X, Y, that's a little bit more challenging. But for a lot of cases, for a lot of the agents listening, you do want to check out your clients. If you're working with a buyer and it turns out that buyer is not going to actually be able to perform, and you've been wasted, like Rob shows all of us in the ultra high end, you are expected as a listing agent to show your own properties and sell it to that buyer. So if you're wasting time of all these high-end listing agents like Rob around Greenwich, Connecticut, and it turns out your buyer can't perform, you've probably burned a bridge more than you think with high-end listing agents like Rob, because now he's going to remember that that buyer you were, claiming was a great quality buyer, it wasn't, and maybe next time around he's not going to be so willing to inconvenience himself on a Sunday afternoon to do a special showing that takes 3 hours for your fictitious buyer.
Yeah, and actually, one of the agents that I had an issue with this year was in exactly that camp, and she's a great agent, but the for but she got it wrong, and it was also, it wasn't like we were going in blind either. It's like, okay, this is a calculated risk. We have some questions, but let's play it out. So I think as long as you, again, back to the client though, if you're on the listing side, making reservations known, and you're not vouching for the person that you don't represent, but how you can add value to someone that may not have thought about this because most people that I'm listing houses for, they're like, conceptually, they understand that people out there are hoaxes, but they also find it very difficult, as do I, until you've had it happen to you enough. Why would someone that's even remotely wealthy what's the end game for this? It's very confusing a lot of times. It's like what is this person trying to achieve? Because they've actually, in some cases, spent $10,000 on an inspector, and I know that inspector's got paid. But and so it's a very confusing landscape. So I think the most important takeaway is, if you're dealing with those types of people, just be very open about your reservations with your client, and say, listen, if he sends the wire, and you don't vouch for other people, but it's your job to value add for your client, to say you've got those reservations, and are they okay proceeding on that basis.
And that's another USP, unique selling proposition, when you're trying to show your value to your prospective buyers and your sellers, is that you are going to take that, experience you have working with those types of clients, and you're going to have to help vet them, so that's something else. If agents are out there trying to understand how somebody like Rob Johnson becomes the number one agent in his marketplace, it's because he's learned from these transactions. It's taken time, a lot of doing what he didn't want to do, and he didn't want to do it at the highest level, to get to where he is. And so, Rob, I can see your phone flashing in your face, so I don't want to keep you away from work any longer.
That's good. I mean, there's also like very basic things as well. Like, I have reservations sometimes if it's just a guy that comes to the house. I've had my own clients who have not wanted to, where their wives haven't come to a house that they've bought, but it's very unusual. I always bet on the women. Honestly, as a driver in a real estate transaction, it's more often the case than not. Sometimes it's the men, but more often it's the lady. And if I've got a guy that's that I know is married, that doesn't want to show his wife, I kind of want to know why.
Yeah, that's true in every price range, by the way.
Yeah, and it can be subtle. It's like, oh, you don't want to. You don't want to. Does your wife not want to see it? You don't have to be intrusive about it, but there are certain sort of flags that is someone willing to go straight to contract? Are they willing to do like non-commercial things to get the house? Like, okay, they think that they're being really good buyers, but what they're telling you is that there are flags. So there's lots of little things along the way that can give you like pause for thought, and helping clients with that is valuable for them. But also, if it does implode, it's self-preservation too, because you've helped the client through that. Like, if you don't do that, there's an element of blame on you at that point.
You're going to keep the listing. In other words, if the deal flakes out, you're going to keep the listing.
Well, yeah, it's relationship management, and at the same time as just being being someone's eyes and ears. They appreciate that. It's not like they run into fraudulent real estate buyers on a daily basis, nor do I, luckily, but I've dealt with enough of them to know that I feel like I'm positioned to at least help my clients somewhat.
I think that people have learned so much from listening to you and realizing, I think you're such a humble and nice and classy guy. I always loved coaching you because of that. You're never pretentious. You're never, even if you had a bunch of shit that basically blew up, some deals that some jerks that stood up in your life, you're always very even keeled. And I'm sure that's probably a big reason why people love doing business with you, because you manage other people, you manage other people's stress in such a classy way that, they're drawn to you. And I hope everyone's realizing that Rob loves what he's doing. He's obviously very good at it, but nothing was really handed to him. He's earned what he has. He's earned the beautiful house that he's in, and all this has made his amazing accomplishments. He's definitely not egotistical. He's not trying to become some big real estate celebrity. He just wants what's best for his clients. And he wants to do it so that at the end of the day, he feels like he really did an honorable job servicing other people. And the accumulation effect of approaching life with the understanding that your highest and truest purpose on this planet is being of service to other people, the accumulation effect of that will make you more money than you could possibly spend in 10 lifetimes. That's just the reality.
And it will also make you more satisfied and happy if you're doing it if you channel it into those reasons. It doesn't make it any less hard work. And you do have to do things, like you said, that you're not comfortable doing now and again. But if it goes back to that as a core, then that's a healthy place to be.
That's right. Rob, do you are you interested in all and communicating with anybody? And I do caution you on giving out your cell phone. I usually ask at the end of the interviews if you were interested in entertaining any direct contact. We should give it a way for them to. I'll put it on the video.
Yeah, I mean, like every realtor, my name and number are out there. My last name doesn't narrow it down very much. There's like 3 million Rob Johnsons, which is a blessing and a curse. But yeah, anyone can feel free to text me or happy.
Well, let me help you out there. Okay. So if you want to get in contact with Rob, if you happen to have someone that's considering Greenwich, Connecticut, they text Rob at
203-979-2360.
All right. I'll have it on the screen. We're also going to have it in the show description from the podcast. So Rob, thank you for catching up. Thank you
My
for
pleasure. It was great to see you. It's been way too long. I know we tried to do this a little while ago, but it's always fun talking to you. Your compliments are always way overboard, but thank you very much. I appreciate it. And no, so it's always good chatting with you, Tim. I miss you.
You same. Well, you know what? You could also basically get back in my coaching schedule. It's always available to you.
I might take you up on that. And if anyone else is thinking about it, I highly recommend it. I can say, to return a compliment to Tim, Tim will get you out of your comfort zone in a good way, with a sense of humor and a level of experience that you won't have with other people. He's not a bullshitter, and he's very, very good at his job. So I would say, if you're thinking about spending money with Tim, or if the other option is branding and doing the glossy stuff, spend your money with Tim.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I really sincerely do. So Rob, God bless you and your family. I really appreciate your time today.
Take care, Tim. Speak
See you.
soon.
You too. Bye.
Bye.